victory and the agony of defeat.
Great ball around the corner, Penasini. He beats them all. Junior Polar out wide, bumped away from Trindle. Sharks coming through. None of them can hold him.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020. Joining me to break down another week of the junior representatives is my good mate, Sixties. Big fella, it's the penultimate round. Oh, sorry, the penultimate regular season round, I suppose, is the best way of putting it, because there will be finals for hopefully all the teams. And before we dive into a breakdown of all four grades out at Eric Tweedale for the first time this year, is that right? Or was it the second time?
No, the last time was four grades out there as well.
It was, yeah, it was. So, but they've very rarely aligned this year. So, big day out at Granville. We'll be covering all four games naturally, mate. But before we start talking football, as always, how you doing today?
Yeah, good, mate. It's a strange old day weather-wise. Popped up to Eels training earlier this morning. It dumped the rain quite heavily.
Bucketed down the inner west for about 40 minutes and then just nicked off, and it's sunny now. So
yes,
definitely.
Yeah, same here. It's nice and sunny. But, yeah, it was under the old umbrella, just trying to stay dry, but struggling. Anyway, the team looked to be in good spirits at training today, which is always a good sign. Won't get to see the captain's run, of course, because that takes place on the day that we're covering the junior reps. But, yeah, I guess they've done virtually all the prep now for this weekend's clash with the Sea Eagles. But before we get into this special junior reps preview, where we are separating the junior reps preview from the senior football, mostly because seven previews on one podcast is a massive ask for people to listen to, and also because the junior reps is proudly sponsored by Parramatta Leagues Club, and they're incredibly generous with junior rugby league in the Parramatta district. So we thought we'd present this now moving forward as a special standalone preview, and also gives us a bit of a chance to have a chat about aspects of junior rugby league or the Parramatta pathways, because we do get questions from time to time about players to keep an eye on, that sort of thing. And if people stay tuned with us till the end of this podcast, when we get to the SG ball, we've had some viewer questions about SG ball, which we'll look into answering via a bit of a let's say a crystal ball look at what the future might be for some of the players from this point onwards. So, John, as you said, big day out at Eric Tweedale Stadium on Saturday. I think it all kicks off from 10:30, and then it's every 2 hours after that. And, of course, as per usual, it's the Lisa Fiola Cup kicking things off. So over to you for the team list.
10:30 a.m. kickoff, like you said, 60s Eric Tweedale Stadium. Eels hosting the Illawarra Steelers in the Lisa Fiola. Parramatta coming off their first loss of the season last week, where they got ambushed by the West Tigers coming out of that global bye. And they're going to be trying to bounce back with a team that looks like this. At fullback, it's Ire Sevilla. On the wings, you got Deja Vivella and Frieden Crichton Rapati. Georgia Wanzi and Cody Tuomasevi are in the centres. Sharon Latapu and Tamika Withers are your halves. Mere Sivo and Isabella Bell, your bookends, with Bailey Marchong at dummy half. Kaizen Morgan Pritchard and Mitzi Cairns are on the edges, with Alicia Meza at lock forward. Anika Penatani, Olivia Saba, Evelyn Kwendu and Kaivenya O'Callaghan Ahio round out the interchange. Hine Rikiti and Halo Talangi are the extended bench players there. And Eels still very much in the hunt for a top two finish here, 60s, and theoretically a top one finish, I guess, if I look at the Lisa Fiola, because they do meet the Bulldogs next week, but the Central Coast Roosters are ahead of them by a fair bit on points differential. So if they win out and then the Eels beat the Bulldogs, it means that the Roosters probably end up on top. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, mate, because, or I'm getting ahead of myself, you haven't said anything, because Eels have to account for the Steelers, who come into this round in 7th position, 3 wins, 3 losses, so that 500 record or 50% win rate, which means that they can certainly get a result, but they're also there to be beaten. And like you alluded to coming out of that loss last week, it was, as far as a loss is going to be, as timely as one as you can have in the junior reps with two games in hand to then refocus for the finals. What are we going to see from the Parramatta Eels coming off that loss from the West Tigers, mate? Are they going to be refocused and renewed and really locked in, or do they get into their own heads a little bit?
Look, I think as far as a football lesson's concerned, it was driven home in terms of errors and just completing the basics, because they invited the Tigers to win that game last week. And don't get me wrong, the Tigers were playing a very physical brand of rugby league, but the Eels started well last week. It started really well. I think from memory, they were up 12-0.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they had tries to Tamika Withers and Leonie Ave put them up to 2 scores, and then they sort of just opened the door for the Tigers on the back of all those errors.
Yeah, and you said on the back of all those errors, it was also at the back end of the half that they literally gave all 12 points back to the Tigers.
It has to be said
time.
Too, probably the flimsiest goal line defense they've had all year. If you go watch those highlights, because you don't need a subscription to see the highlights on New South Wales Rugby League TV, the Tigers scored some pretty soft tries.
Yeah. So I think it would probably sharpen the focus of the forwards, because there probably wasn't the sting in defence that there has been from the Lisa Fiaola Cup forwards that we've seen earlier this season. They were a team that that can really bully their opponents. The Tigers got on top last week, and once they grabbed that ascendancy, they went on with it. They scored the first 3 tries then at the second half, so it was like 5 unanswered tries after such a bright start by the Eels. Maybe the Eels got ahead of themselves a little bit early on with that game. They certainly seemed to lose the intensity, and that's why I think it was a loss that's not going to hurt them, because it reminds them, okay, if you don't maintain the intensity, this is what other teams can do. And, the Tigers, I think from memory, they're reasonably well placed to play finals football as well.
Yes.
So they don't want to be giving anything away like that again. They should get this one this week. Should. I mean, mind you, the Steelers have been, in recent years, very strong in their female pathways and produced some NRLW players as well. But given the record of the 2 teams, you'd think the Eels get the job done here. If they don't, they face the Bulldogs next week, which is a monumental task in regular season football. They don't want to be in a situation where they go into the finals, maybe losing 3 on the trot. And I'm not saying that they aren't a chance of beating the Bulldogs, but the Bulldogs will by far be the biggest test for any team this season, and it comes in the way of a last round opponent. And you don't like to look ahead 2 weeks, but I think this match, in the context of the regular rounds and where the Eels want to be, I think it's an important victory for them to get. I think they'll be ultra focused. I think they'll get the job done. And as I said, I think the forwards will aim up a bit better this week.
They have to step up 60s, because no Leonie Ave, no Katia Duff this week, 2 of their core starting forwards. And Leonie's come off the bench with great impact as well. She's quite versatile in her capacity as a front rower, but they are certainly 2 of their first pick forwards. And them being absent this week, I believe by way of injury, because I think Leonie scored her try and then limped off after that. So maybe she did an ankle or something. I'm not 100% certain, but I think she's banged up. So that they need the people who have come in this week in the likes of Mera Sivor and Alicia Meza alongside those who then replace those players on the bench to all put their hands up. So certainly still not lacking in talent, 60s. It's still a very good team on paper. And what will be the big inhibitor to them will be, like you alluded to, errors and those lapses if they let them creep into the game. And the Steelers certainly won't go away easily. So Parramatta do need to be playing some solid football. But if they do get on top of those fundamentals, there is every reason to think that they can go on and win this one pretty well.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, which then brings us to the Tarsha Gale Cup.
Yes.
Which is on at 12:30.
12:30,
and
correct.
Where it's interesting that we don't have to juggle around with the order with this, that it's literally goes girls, youngest to oldest, boys, youngest to oldest. It's pretty straightforward as we
Jersey flag in the middle of all of it too. They're actually on
that's it.
Part of, I mean, credit the Manly. They got that triple header set up on Sunday, which is something the Eels haven't been able to do thus far of their home games between the flag and the New South Wales Cup. But be a big day out at Manly for those teams, and we'll cover that in our other podcast. But this one here, 60s, like you mentioned, the follow-up game to the Lisa Fioa, kicking off at 12:30 p.m. at Eric Tweedale. Eels coming off the back of a much, much needed win against the West Tigers, 20-10, if I recall correctly. Very testing conditions last week, very greasy. Leichhardt not being very kind with the sea breeze and the bay water blowing in. And they did a good job to get that win, and they look like this against the Steelers, trying to consolidate their position inside the top four. Dallas
interesting selections this week.
Yes, John. Yes, there are some interesting selections as the Eels. We're not fully sure of the injury situation, because looking at one in the back line, it is a very spicy pick, a player who's been getting a lot of plaudits for good reason this year in the forward pack. But at fullback, we start with a non-controversial pick, Dallas Graham-Wivell. She's been the custodian all season, does a great job there. On the wings, we've got Sualo Lafonga and Avinia Rakoma Ngata. And then in the centres, Jessamine Aloala has been there for, if not all, most of the season. But Kylia Gray, 60s, the outstanding ball-playing back rower, showing her versatility for her coach there in Shah Henry, getting out into the centres. And again, we're not really sure what the troop situation is in the back line. The Eels could be going for a real nasty toll of suspensions and injuries, taking a toll there, but we'll have to wait and see. But Kylia is pretty dynamic for a back row, and I think she'll do a good job there. In the halves, no changes this week, though. Sammy Gunn to Awai and Aliyah Sufan. They've been the 6 and 7, or the front line 6 and 7 for the entire season. Then you got Taylor Falanico and Tess McWilliams in the front row. I thought Tess had a great game on the weekend, 60s. Didn't show up on the scorer sheet, but some great defense, some great runs. Ava Jones is at dummy half. Fontaine Tafua and Riverly Arlo return this week, and a big boost for the Eels there with Matoisha Kalepo on the other edge. So just to clarify, Fontaine and Matoisha are on the edges. Riverly Arlo at lock forward. Then on the interchange, Rory Mueller is your dummy half utility. Layla Kewick, who I believe can also play dummy half too, right, 60s? Am I?
Yeah, not.
No.
Are you talking about Layla, were you?
Yeah, I'm getting my players mixed up here.
No, Layla's very much I think a middle forward.
Yeah, I am getting my players mixed up here. Sorry.
Or edge.
You know what? Maybe she's waiting to be a dummy half, and we just don't know it yet. But Amani Lee, Avae, and Alana Lachlan round out the 4-player interchange with Christine Tongia as the reserve player. And in this one, look, we alluded to it back a number of episodes ago when we were talking about the Tarsha Gale in the context of previewing the season, in that they wanted to get those early wins, which they did, but then they had that struggle because they were running the gauntlet at the end of the season. And the West Tigers were part of it. And it's the Steelers now and it's Bulldogs next week. And I think it was essentially the other members of the top 4 at the time. And the Eels got past the Tigers last week, so they managed to leapfrog them there. That was a big one. But now they take on the Steelers, who come into this game in second place with just the one loss to their name. Although the Eels do have the better points differential. So these two teams are probably pretty evenly placed right now. And it gives the Eels a great chance, if they get back to what they were doing against the Tigers and in better conditions, hopefully, to be highly competitive against Illawarra.
Yeah, it showed the importance of getting that victory over the Tigers last week. You mentioned Tess McWilliams. She was actually unlucky not to be awarded a try. The referee adjudged her to have knocked on when she was grounding the ball or like pushed it forward. But the Eels ended up scoring a try, I think, within the next 60 seconds anyway after that. So In terms of the scoreboard, it didn't matter much. But it's always good to see a prop get a meat pie. So it was disappointing that it wasn't ruled that way. She certainly got up convinced that she'd scored, was celebrating. So I trust rugby league players when they claim the try, mate. I know that they'd never fox.
Would never lie. Would never lie.
Never lie. No. So look, it is an interesting selection with Kylia Gray. The thing about Kylia is she's definitely a player that will play what's in front of her. You know, she's very much a thinking player. I like her game sense that she has. You know, and it's some straightforward stuff. You know, knowing when to pass, knowing when to run. It might seem like a very basic thing, but it's something that you know, the better players have in spades, and I like her capacity for that. But apart from that, I think from memory, Rivali's been out for a number of weeks. Might have been concussion protocols.
I believe it was concussion, yes.
So good to see her back. I think she's stood down. She's been stood down for 2 rounds from memory.
The way it fell, because they've got a longer mandatory stand down process than the NRL, I believe. So it fell across multiple games, and I believe that I don't know if it was concussion related or if it was just a different injury, but also Fontaine Tafua has been out and now comes back into the team. That's a big boost. Those 2 back rowers are outstanding talents and will absolutely help the Eels on the weekend. Yeah.
So John, it's a tough ask this week. It really is. I think the girls are going to have to be on their. I was going to say on their best behaviour, but in their best form,
on their best football behaviour, holding on to the ball.
Yeah. That they really will need to bring it this week because, as I said before, the Steelers have always been traditionally good in the girls' pathways, and we've seen them have some very, very strong Tasha Gale sides. Did they not win it in a recent season? I'm sure at the very least they were in a final.
They've been in the finals and deep in the finals. Let me have a quick gander at recent years if I can just get through.
I have it in my head that about 2 years ago they might have.
So they won. They won in 24.
There you go.
There you go.
Yeah,
and then,
last year.
Then it's obviously been the Roosters and the Dogs, Roosters and the Knights. The Dragons were in it, which I guess is their sister club there. They might have been were they Steelers and Dragons back then? I'm not sure. Yes, they were, because they were in the semi-finals that year in 21. So, yeah, they've been deep in the finals or winners of the final for plenty of years.
Yeah. So, look, it's probably based on exposed form. It's probably a toss of the coin, and maybe the Eels get the edge with a bit of home ground advantage. When I say home ground advantage, they also train at the match venue. So you'd like to think that that familiarity is going to assist them on match day. But yeah, it is a toss of the coin. I'll obviously go the Eels to just edge out the Steelers, but I'm expecting it to be a quality match, John.
Yeah, I agree. And great tune-up for the following week against the Bulldogs, because if the Eels want to be competitive against Canterbury, they need to be able to be highly competitive with the Steelers. So they'll know where they're at the final whistle after about an hour of football against Illawarra. I certainly think they can get the win 60s. I don't know if they will, just because of the quality of the opposition, but it should be a good game. So obviously you back the girls to win on after all that's said and done. But you say that knowing that Illawarra absolutely even dogs in this one.
Yeah, true. So true. Okay, that now takes us to the Harold Mats.
Yeah, Parramatta Eels in the Harold Mats playing at 2:30 p.m. Eric Tweedale again. They're taking on the Central Coast Roosters in this one, and I believe the Central Coast Roosters are positioned pretty well. They have positioned very well. Second on the ladder, just the one loss. 5 wins from their 6 starts. They trail the Illawarra Steelers in this grade, funnily enough, just talking about them. But Eels coming off a pretty solid win against the Western Suburbs Magpies. They look like this going against the Roosters. Riley Davis is their fullback. You got Kobe McCloskey and Christopher Mawala on the right edge at centre and wing, or wing and centre in that order, with Cyrus Bloomfield at left centre and Santiago Uata on the left wing. Talon Rosati and Caleb Liata'a are in the halves. Kasinga Noah continues the transition. Sorry, just got a fly, just dropped on me there. Kasinga Noah transitions from the back row to the props again, and he'll partner Billy Fanene in the front row with Giro Trey Stewart at dummy half. Michael Nower and Hayden Bell are on the edge of 60s. Hayden, I believe, has been playing a fair bit of dummy half this year, so there's some positional versatility for you. Samuel Polly at lock forward. Then you got Zach Withers, Curtis Brown, Chase Attard, and Epapara Tahu Apiata on the rotation, with Strance Skamkul, Jermaine Fa'afiu, and Zayn Alamuddin as part of that three-man extended roster. Last week, the Eels were equal parts brilliant and busted. It felt like 60s. The errors and the penalties were very frustrating, but they backed that up with some magnificent defense and some champagne rugby. And I suppose if you're going to make the errors, if you're going to back it up, the coach is going to be happy to some degree. But going up against the second place Central Coast Roosters, you can't afford that same luxury of just turning that much ball over. And they'll certainly need to sharpen that part of their game while retaining those other aspects that they showed against the Magpies if they want to get the big upset. And they need the upset here, 60s, because they come into this round in 8th position, which does qualify them for the finals as it stands, but they're sharing that position with the Sharks, with the Bears, got the Raiders, the Dragons, the Tigers, the Magpies hot in the tail too, with results pending across 2 rounds. So you can't afford to slip here.
Well, basically, the last 2 matches are must-win.
I agree. Yes, you can look at mathematicals and other results, but you have your destiny in your hands right now, and you need to make sure you take a grip of it.
Yeah, look, Stephen Nunn's a big out for the Eels. I think there might have been an issue, I'm not 100% sure on this, but there might have been an issue around concussion. I think there was also maybe an issue with suspension as well, but he's a big contributor in the middle for the Eels, and they'll miss his drive forward. You mentioned players playing in positions that are a little bit different. I'm sure Billy Fanini was
also been
playing a dummy half.
Dummy half in the past, yes. So is there a configuration that we're missing here? Because I was looking at this, I don't know. Like Chase Attard plays and Epapara Tauapiata are forwards, so there could be some pre-game shuffling to make it look a little bit different. But maybe they see these guys as having that kind of versatility.
Yeah, well, Zach plays edge forward, Curtis middle, Chase middle, and Epapara. Is he middle as well?
I believe he's a middle, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, look, interesting. The Harold Matt's team are a team which has that capacity to beat a team that'll be sitting at the top, or lose to a team that's not in the top 8. That's been the level of inconsistency that we've seen this year. We know that when they're on song, they've got an attack which is just really hard to hold out. And we saw that last week with all that defence they had to do in the first half. And I'm screaming out, hold on to the ball in that last 30 seconds of the first half.
And then Christopher Mile goes for a ranging run. Yep.
They decided to spread it on their own 20 after just doing defending, and score this long-range remarkable try. So they're not afraid to chance their hand. That's certainly the case. Tell you who's been a bit of a revelation, John, is Kobe McCloskey on the wing.
He's been great.
He's his try-scoring ability has been good, but it's been his defensive reads that have really caught the eye. Like he's timed the jam almost to perfection. shut down some really dangerous attack from opponents over the last few weeks. So, yeah, he's certainly one that's he came into the team probably midway through the regular rounds. When I say came into the team, I mean got a start. After, like, he wasn't there from the opening round, but he's certainly making that wing spot his own at the moment. Riley Davis, he's been a good inclusion since they swapped Cyrus to the centre position. I really like the way he will inject into those wide shifts, and also as the fullback coming in, he makes some very good calls as well about when to pass, when not to pass. So I think he's been a great inclusion. But apart from that, John, as I said, we've got a talented team, but one that can be prone to handing far too many opportunities to their opponents. And as such, it's been inconsistent results. So they've got to get the job done this week, and then turn around and get the job done the next week. But because it's this, you've got to have the 1 week at a time mentality. It's a big ask this week, and they need to be, like I said, with the Tarsha Gale, they need to be on their best footy behaviour. And I'll tip them to get the job done, but I think they've got to start well, and they've got to get those basics right. You just don't switch off. You can't switch off this week, fellas. You got to be, focused. They play 30-minute halves in the mats. Focused for an hour. That's it. Nothing less.
Yeah, I think the Central Coast Roosters are reasonably warm favourites here just on the exposed form across the course of the season. But Parramatta did produce a pretty good result last week. And in terms of pure talent, there is no doubting that this team can mix it with anyone 60s. You mentioned that they, for as many games as they could drop against bottom 8 opponents, they could easily take a game from any of the top 8 opponents. So it's going to be on them to actually consolidate on a win. And that's what we haven't really seen from them this year, is they've had good individual results. Had a very good win against it wasn't pretty because it was round 1, but they had a very good win against Newcastle Knights, who are inside the top 5. They obviously dusted up the Penrith Panthers earlier this year in a completely classy showing. So they've had some great individual results, but they have not been able to build on them. And
you know what you just said, great individual results. They've had great individual performances as well.
Exactly.
It's just hasn't quite gelled as a team in every game. And we singled out a few individuals before. I mean, you can easily add Samuel Polly.
Oh, he's been awesome this year. And I suppose in that sort of vein of thought, that we've seen more individual efforts than team efforts. Defensively, we saw a team effort last week. That was absolutely a team effort. And maybe that's going to be the building block for an upset win against the Central Coast Roosters. And certainly defensively, they're going to need to be on their best behaviour or form, or however you want to phrase it, with a team like the Central Coast Roosters coming in. So they're underdogs, and I think the Roosters deserve the title favouritism. But there is no doubting that if they can build on last week, if they can play clean football, that the Eels can take them. So that's what I'm clinging to right now, is that the Eels play some clean footy and let their individual talents speak for themselves on the back of that team play. And I think if they do that, then the Eels can easily account for the Roosters. I say easily, can account for the Roosters. That's a little bit too arrogant of a football term there.
Yep. And now we turn to the lone undefeated team in the Eels ranks, which is the SG Ball.
Yes, not a flawless regular season because, of course, there was a draw in round 2, but certainly undefeated. And the lone undefeated team, not just for Parramatta, but across the entire SG Ball. And they look like this as they take on the North Sydney Bears. At fullback, Cameron Bamblett gets to reprise his role at fullback after starring last week. 60s, he was outstanding. He holds on to the number 1. Larima Rokasuka will play down the left edge, I believe. Or actually, this will be interesting to see because Larima played left edge or left sideline before he was rotated, and this was a roster eligibility thing for the finals. And Aiden Kaburian played left last week, but Dom Farouche is out, and Aiden's been named in Dom's number 5, so I imagine he would play right edge here. So Lorima, I assume, will be on the left and Aiden on the right. In the centres, Anders Johansson comes back and he plays down the right edge, 60s? Or left edge?
Yes.
He plays left edge because I remember he gave away the penalty coming defensively. He jammed in from the left edge and the fullback fell into him against...
Yeah. No, you're right. He does play left.
Yeah. And Nathan Howlett will be at centre. So there we are off the back line there. We got there eventually. The halves are unchanged. The outstanding pair of Lorenzo Talataina and Lincoln Fletcher in the 6 and 7 respectively. The very much consolidated front row now of Elijah Shane Tapau, Lachlan Koinakis and Ryder Talangi in the 8, 9 and 10. They were dominant against the Magpies last week, 60s, and have been building really nicely. In the back row, again unchanged, Josiah Funarayuto, I believe, is the team captain. He'll be on one edge with Christopher Petrus on the left, Josiah on the right, Max Popo at lock forward. On the interchange, you've got Wesley Picodi, Trace Beattie, Larima Saukuru, and Isaac Jim, the towering Isaac Jim, who's been great in the mid-season. Then Bo Lucian and Lachlan Vella as the two extended players in the roster. Very good team, 60s. Very, very good team. It's even with all the rotations that they've been doing, which it speaks to the quality of the depth they have, because guys like Bamblett and Kaburian have come into that starting back line and they didn't drop a beat. So this is a team where it's kind of hard to find a weakness. And they look...
It's almost an embarrassment of riches.
It really is for the grade. And we're going to
look at some of the players that are not getting a start, and that's how you measure it. And then you also go, well, they're missing a regular starting winger as well. So it's it's as I said, it's almost an embarrassment of riches that are there. Now we're not getting carried away with that, and we'll explain why in a moment when we talk about the SG ball as individuals, and we are going to be guarded to an element with that as well. We don't want to put pressure on young players who are, playing age football, which is completely different to playing open age football. So we'll be tempered in our assessments, but we've had some questions that we will try to address with that. But anyway, John, this week they're facing North Sydney.
Yeah, running second last in the competition. They've got a solitary win to their name with 6 losses and the worst points differential in the competition.
I do, however, John, recall
there's been a game in the past.
University. Yeah. I think you know full well what I'm talking about, which was in atrocious conditions.
It was wet and heavy track, and we butchered that one. Yeah, we got ambushed. Well, not so much ambushed as we were just bumbling in that game.
I think we got the win, but it was as ugly as anything. And whereas people were picking up like 40, 50 points on points differential every time, for every match against the Bears, that particular year,
a single digit,
2 points or something, or 1 point.
Yeah, it was one of the cornerstone games to remind you to not take any matchup on paper for granted. So
yeah, well, they were a real chance of winning that day. It was like the great escape, but it wasn't so great in the end anyway, because I think that points differential might have come home to her.
Yes, I believe that was the year that they might have miscalculated the points differential in general, but we did miss out on the finals, not regardless, but independently of that, based on what was on the table. So yeah, that one is the poster child for why you don't take ladder positions and net wins and losses too far, because obviously they do help you guide form and predictions, but it's a reminder that once you get to that field and that whistle blows, anything can happen on the field. So, look,
John, looking at the team, in all honesty, you can look at every one of the players as individuals, and find absolute star moments that each of them has had during the season.
Yeah,
like that. That's so that they functioned as individuals. I don't think they found anywhere near their best as a team. I think what they found as a team is a never say die attitude. But in terms of cohesion, it still hasn't quite been there for them, especially in attack. They bruise in defence. They hit hard in defence. We've certainly seen high levels of aggression in in the games that they've, the games have got a bit fiery this season in SG ball. Well, they have as well, even in Mats, but they have got quite fiery. It's the collisions have been, I thought, quite big this year, and I think as a team, as I said, the cohesion hasn't quite been there, but they're on the same page with that steely determination to just to not give up in any game or any circumstance. They've grabbed some unlikely victories in terms of how the match was going. They just found a way to get out of it towards the end. But I'm waiting for them to truly click as a team because, as I said, I can pick all these highlight moments with every player that's going out there. But getting it all happening in the one game, I think their best performance was probably the game against, I think it was the Raiders, where the Raiders were, or was it South?
It was.
Just
they met both Souths and Canberra's undefeated teams.
Yes.
They were down 16-0 against South Sydney and came back to post, I think, 24 unanswered points. And then against Canberra, they shut the door on them pretty much. It was very much a one-sided game. So
yeah, they were very much the two. That's why I was thinking, like they're really the highlight games for me this season because of the quality of the opponent. And they're probably warming into the season, but as I said, I still don't think they're there yet. So in terms of their best football, I honestly believe they can probably improve 30 to 40% on what we've seen. And that might seem like a rather big figure to throw out there, but that's how much potential I think that there is in this team as a team. So, look, I would say they win and they win by plenty.
Yeah, look, with respect to what we said earlier about not taking any matchup for granted, I do think Parramatta do win well on the weekend. This should be a statement or a chance to make a statement. Not that they haven't made statements this season, being undefeated, but position themselves nicely for the final round, and then really lock up a top 1, top 2 finish this week based on other results.
I want them to, John. I want them to play just good rugby league, high completion rates, that sort of thing. I remember many years ago. When I say many years ago, it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago, when Western Australia had a team in the SG Ball, and I think the Eels beat them something like 96-0. And you look at that and you go, well, you probably saw some tries in that. They actually, that particular day, everything was conventional. Like there wasn't any extravagant play. And the ball was respected. And despite the scoreline, I guess the opponents were respected by virtue of the way that the football was played. I want them to play the type of football that the coach would want them to play, which is the high completion rate, taking your chances when they're there, hurting the opponents in defence. Just get the basics done, and they will get the scoreline that we think they will get. So now, John, that segues into questions that we've had about what players should we be keeping an eye on? Who do we think could be earmarked for the future as NRL players? Well, if I want to start this off with I guess a proviso with this. We speak so often about that identifying future NRL players is one of the most inexact sciences that you could possibly take on. And of course, the other thing is too that there is that great difference between age football and senior football. And players, I've lost count of the number of players who stand out at age level, but they don't go on with the job. Now, that can be for various reasons. There's very little difference between a person that goes on to be to have an NRL career, and I'll call them an average NRL player, not a superstar player, but an average NRL player, and I don't use the word average in terms of anything derogatory, but I think the average NRL player plays way less than 50 NRL games, right? So, but they get a career out of it to an extent. Now, the difference in talent between some of the players that only get, say, to Jersey Flegg level and those that end up with making a career out of football can be negligible, like the difference in talent. It comes down to a lot of intangibles, that dedication, the willingness to make sacrifices, that the mental resilience to put up with the challenges that come their way, luck with injuries, luck with opportunities. There's a whole lot of things that can determine, and I guess also being at the right club with the right coach at the right time.
Yeah, definitely.
It's because, and that probably feeds into opportunity as well. But a lot of these things, align for players who do make a career out of rugby league. But it very much starts with what's inside the player. That how much does it mean to them to be a rugby league player? What are they prepared to do in the way of the time that they dedicate to it, the way that they're prepared to be humble and listen to advice and coaching that they get along the way, coupled with that self-confidence in themselves. You have to have that humility, but you also have to have that confidence to back your ability. So all of that can come into as factors about whether the players are going to make it or not. So how do you want to tackle this, John, in terms of assessing them? Because we could virtually go through each player and say what they have to offer, and I'm a little bit reticent to single out a couple of players from it and single them out from the group.
It does a disservice to the rest of the team, like you said. And perhaps the way I will frame this, and it sort of runs ancillary to what you're saying here, is I've sort of immediately when Josh, who was in live chat a couple of podcasts ago, sort of proposed the idea of doing an evaluation of the SG Ball on a macro level and looking at their long-term prospects, what immediately triggered my mind was thinking back to some of the most talented teams that we've had, most successful teams we've had in the juniors. And 3 teams immediately came to mind, 60s for good reason. The 2 SG Ball teams were the 17 and 23 teams, both premiership winning. And then on the back of that 17 SG Ball team, the Holden Cup team of the same year going up against Manly in the finals and losing in the last minute in heartbreak in that final. And just for perspective, to when you have some of the all-time teams for Parramatta, and those 3 teams were some of the best teams we've seen in our time as at least TCT. Obviously, there was the famous Hayne Inu classes, Chris Keating, whatnot, going back prior to that.
Timmy Manor.
Exactly.
In that
insane
team.
comp. But in our time as TCT, as the collective entity where we've been calling games and providing coverage and sort of talent analysis of the juniors, they were some of the best. That 17 ball team had a ton of great players that didn't make it. The players who have played first grade were Hayes Dunster, Ethan Parry should have but didn't. Joe Top,
well, he played a couple of games.
He played, sorry, he did. You're right. He should have played a lot more though. But so he put Ethan Parry as 2. Did Joe Topari play for the Roosters at one point?
I don't think he played at first grade level.
No. Obviously,
he's been playing at New South Wales Cup level, and I think he played for the Bears, and I think he played for Wests at New South Wales Cup level.
Yep. You got Dylan Brown, obviously.
Yep.
Going beyond that, Matt Doorey in the back row, and I believe that is it. You got 4 players. And then there are names.
Did we not have? Was Oregon in that? Oregon Kafusi, was he in that team?
He was playing he plays as the next team, but he wasn't named in this team. So I don't know if he was injured. because he was part of the Holden Cup team in the same year. So,
Okay.
But from the grand final team, you have 4 players: Dunster, Parry, Brown, and Matt Dury. And then there are names there like JP Nora. You got Noel Akafalau. We mentioned Joseph Taipari, but Kyle Schneider. Charbel Tassapali and Jesse Cronin were both fantastic players that Charbel had just fell short between Parramatta and the Sharks. So, that was an all-conquering team that took on, that was Jamin Salmon's Cronulla Sharks too. Luke Metcalf, Bronson Sherry on the other side, Ronaldo Mulatalo. Who else we got? Franklin Pele played a little bit of NRL, I think. Teague Wilton. So that was one of the highest quality sets of rosters there, and you've got not even double-digit first graders between the two teams. The 2017 Holden Cup team, Greg Liliciao, now known as Greg Marju, both Dane and Noel Akafla are in there. Johnny Fanua, who's now at Penrith, Sione Fanua, hasn't played first grade yet, but Dean Madison's played a little bit of first grade. Dylan Brown's there. Reed Marnie, Oregon Kafusi. You got Ray Stone, Sean Kepi. So there's a few more first graders there, but still a stack of other players there who were great in the juniors that didn't translate. Denzel Tanisi, Celeste Fayinga. Who else we got there? Johnny Fanua was very talented too, and there's the fact that he's now even close to first grade is a testament to his talent relative to being away from the game. And then the 23 class 60s, which people will be much more familiar with because there are players actively in first grade as youngsters now. Obviously, Blaze Talangi, Ethan Sanders, Matty Arthur, Sam Tuivasa, Charlie Geimer. Who else we got there? That's it for the Eels, I believe. And then you got players like Arpa Twiddle, Richard Penasini, Muhammad Al-Madine, Joshua Lynn, Dom DeStratus and his brother Raf, Saxon Pryke. They're all talent still trying to fight their way through the pathways towards an NRL debut. But these are some, and on the night side in that game, only player to have played first grade, I believe, is Fletcher Sharp. So the Eels beat the Knights in the day by 6 points, but despite all the talent, I think only one player from the Knights has progressed to first grade. So that sort of contextualizes our discussion where this is a very good SG ball team in 2025 60s. But the reality is that you're going to get 4 or 5 first graders out of this crop if you are incredibly lucky. And that is just the cold, hard metrics of rugby league. And it sucks to say that, but that is the cold reality about this team, is that as talented as they are, if you are lucky, you get 4 or 5 first graders.
Yeah. So I guess if you're going to narrow it down in the first instance, you'd go, well, Josiah got a partial NRL pre-season. Dom Ferrugia got a partial NRL pre-season. So you would think that the club has them locked in as players that they think have a future. Now, that, of course, does not mean that they are the exclusive ones from that group. It's just that
they are some of the better bets there, and they
and
both,
also means they've secured themselves a contract, which included an NRL preseason.
It gets the door open, gets your foot well past the entryway there. You're in front of the coaches at the senior level. You're getting all the access to senior sports science and insights and training that give you a huge boost if you're willing to embrace it. And I imagine that those two will be and have. But they are certainly the two that come to mind immediately. Then you've got some other players who have achieved Australian schoolboy status, which is also one of the better indicators of potential NRL pathways development in Lincoln Fletcher and Ryder Talangi and Lockie Koinakis. So that's also a pretty solid indicator. If you go back looking through past Australian schoolboys teams, there is a relatively high conversion rate to NRL talent.
Well, that's in that instance, what you have is talent spotters outside of the club.
Exactly, evaluating these players.
Evaluating those particular players, yeah. So, but still, what we're talking about is there are still two grades for them to progress through before you start talking about NRL. So the next level is still age football, with the Jersey Flegg being under 21. And, I think you start to get a genuine idea once the players have hit New South Wales Cup. This is why, and it's tangential to what we're talking about, but it's why, I believe they have to be very, very careful with an reintroduction of an NYC competition, because it cannot be at the expense of a senior competition like New South Wales Cup.
And that's what they've struggled with. Is I do love the idea of a nationalised youth competition where you have it married up against all the NRL clubs, whether it's 17, 18, 19 or 20 eventually. But it can't harm reserve grade, because they're equally important nurseries to player development. And that's always been the issue for the NRL, at least in the last, 2 decades, I would argue. Whereas,
Yes.
back in the 80s, it was different, completely different. What I will say about this squad 6 is we've mentioned the players that have had NRL pre-seasons this year in Dom and Josiah. We've mentioned the Australian schoolboys. Then there's obviously Lorenzo Talatino, who was absolutely carving up this year, and he's been flagged in years gone by in the mats as a dynamic runner of the ball and a player that can turn a game. He's having a great year. He's obviously a player to put a little note next to, given that the Eels are in the hunt for a half in the short and long term, and he'll be part of that conversation alongside Lincoln, alongside Arthur Twite, alongside Josh Lynn, and even guys like Matty Hunter up in the flag. But in general, for this team, what I find interesting in a good way is that you look at players like Anders Johansson and Larima Rokasuka, Aiden Kaburian. You look at forwards like Elijah Shane Tapau and Christopher Petrus, who they recruited this year, and even Max Popo at lock forward, alongside absolute monsters on the bench like Isaac Jim. And the Eels have a lot of just raw, strong physical profiles relative to their slot opposition projection in the NRL. They've got good athletic wingers that can run far, run not super speedy but fast enough. They've got a big centre in Anders Johansson. They've got an absolute monster in Isaac Jim on the bench. They've got big forwards in Elijah Shane Tapau and Christopher Petrus. So these are all guys that, with those just raw attributes, given that cocktail of possibilities that you spoke about between individual motivation, between opportunity, between luck, between having the right coaches in place, they are guys that could track towards an NRL career at some point. So that's what I do like about this SG Ball squad, is that the player profile, physical profiles are very good. There's certainly great individual talent, as we mentioned, between the guys that have had NRL pre-seasons, Australian schoolboy jerseys, and just outstanding junior rep careers. So this is a very well-balanced team. And that's why we said during the preview against the Bears, it is very difficult to find a gap, find a weakness in this team. And it's not to say that they can't lose in the finals and not make the premiership theirs, as we spoke about with the 17 and 23 teams. There's no guarantee they win this premiership, but they are a very, very well-balanced team, and they should be the backbone of Flegg and Cup teams across the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, when it comes to their prospects for the title, I'd say the potential is for them to be their own worst enemy.
Agreed.
In getting the job done, because I think if they are playing anything like what their best football will be, and as I said, I don't think they've got there, nor have they really got close to what I think their potential is as yet. But if they do, like if they produce efforts the same as what they did in the I think the back end of the game against South, and then as they did all game against the Raiders, then they get the job done. But as I said, there is something promising about all of the players, because they've all had highlight moments this year. It now becomes all those other intangibles that will determine how far they go as players. The interesting thing is there are some the odd young one that's there. A rider actually springs to mind, because I think this is his first
Fletcher.
season of Yep, and Lincoln Fletcher as well.
Anders Johansson, first-year player as well. So
yes.
there are some core players there that are in their first year of ball, and that's always a great sign. I mean, there's players like Isaac Jim who we didn't see for the first month of football. He sort of came from nowhere for me. It must have been injured or something else in the.
I have it in mind when I covered the trials, and I was doing so without a team list.
That there was a big bopper that stood out.
There was someone who looked suspiciously like him, who also had an impressive mullet, who was creating havoc out there and ended up after the match in a moon boot. And I just have the suspicion that that's who it was. I could be wrong. I think I've got some notes back then that I haven't gone through. I think I got a tip from one of the Cumberland Throw followers who was more familiar with the junior area that this particular player came from. So we might get a bit of a tip in the response to this podcast about Isaac's background. But yes, there are the young ones. There are the ones that have seemed to come out of the blue. There's change of positions, like, for example, Nathan Howlett spent that time at fullback, and I thought he went really, really well at fullback, but he's a centre and he's gone back to centre. And I think from memory, Cameron Bamblett, I think we poached him from Penrith.
From Penrith, and he started the season in the halves while Lorenzo was out for the first 2 games. And then I don't know if he got injured or was just caught in the form of the other boys, but he came back last week playing fullback and looked really good against the Western Suburbs Magpies. So,
look, you have a look at someone like Aidan Kaburian, right, who and has not been able to play this year until pretty much until recent weeks, and then has a whale of a game last week.
And Lockie Vella's in the same position, or the opposite position now, where he had a really good series of games early in the season, got injured, and is now on the outside looking in as part of the extended roster this week.
Now, is Lockie one of the younger ones?
I believe
as well.
He might be. Let me have a quick gander at last year's Harold Matthews.
Because I think he missed last year, but was that going to be his second year at Harold Matthews?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Because I think he made the under-16 city team in his first year. I just have it in my head that he was in the city team.
Because he did his ACL at the end of the year, didn't he? And then missed all the junior reps the following year. So that would mean Harold Matts, go back. That one
would have been 2023 Harold Matts.
Yes, so he should be part of his team here. Yes, so he scored a try in the grand final qualifier against Newcastle that we barely lost in 23, and that would mean that New South Wales City Country.
And we should mention, as you're just working your way through that, son of Michael Vella.
Yes, yes. We played a Vella last week for the Western Suburbs Magpies. Is that also?
I can't say that it is. I feel that Vella might be like a Maltese Smith.
Yes.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, Lockie did make the under-16s in 2023. You're right, 60. So that was his first year of Matt's eligibility. He then did his ACL at the end of the year, and obviously a terrible injury. So he missed the 24 Matt season, and is now in his first year of SG Ball eligibility, if our maths is correct. So another junior eligible player, which is always great to see doing well. So, yeah, to wrap things up, 60s, this is a very talented SG ball class. I think that there's quite a few first graders in the making, hopefully for the Parramatta Eels, but the way things shake out, sometimes you lose them. And I think the other thing to consider too is that there's a lot of players here who will be part of the cornerstone and building blocks for keeping the flag and the cup young and energised. So they might not all go in the first grade, but I think there's a lot of important players here, a la what Penrith have done in the past, to keep that churn in a good way happening below first grade.
Yeah, and John, maybe as a follow-up to this, when we do next week's preview, what we might do as well is try to do something similar with the Tasha Gale squad.
Yep, sounds good.
Yeah, next week becomes problematic in terms of our coverage because it just so happens that Parramatta has a Saturday game against the Dragons in the NRL, and I think we've got a clash with maybe a grade or two with junior reps.
Almost certainly, yeah.
That day. So, but we'll do our best to work our way through it. But John, I think that just about covers the junior reps preview, and really this again a special edition that we have of the preview podcast dedicated to juniors, with thanks to Parramatta Leagues Club and their generous support of Junior Rugby League in the Parramatta District. And also, I should mention, get behind the 50-50 charity raffle, because it does, the proceeds do go towards the Eels Foundation that not only help to shape future Eels footballers, but also go towards the community with that centre of excellence up there at Kellyville, and with all the great programs that the Parramatta Eels will run. That's, the fun, as I said, the money raised through the 50-50 charity raffle goes towards that. So it goes towards a great cause there. John, I think that just about wraps things up. And as I always say, go you mighty Eels.